Changes around us every day. So, how do you manage the changes that happen in mining year round? Welcome to another episode of Change Itself, hosted by Gus Miner and Eric Demers. This show is brought to you by Sophie and Technica Mining and is produced by Crownsman Partners. Now, here are your hosts, Gus and Eric.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Change Itself. If it's the first time you join us, welcome. And if you've come from a previous episode, welcome back. We're here today with Eric Demers and a very close friend and acquaintance of ours, Paul Thususka from A&M Remediations. And episode 13. Here we are, Eric.
Another one in the books. Let's go.
Yeah, so we're officially past that 1 year mark. It feels pretty nice. And for everybody that wants to get notifications every time we have an episode coming out, you can check us out at changeitself.com or follow us on LinkedIn, ring the bell, hit the like button, all those fancy social media things, and we'll be in your queues. So today we've got a pretty interesting topic overall. I mean, we've discussed a lot of things over change and a lot of technologies and implementations of different solutions and systems. And when it comes to environmental, Eric, like we've seen a lot of transitions in environmental.
Yep.
So we've got Paul that's going to, shed some light on what's going on with environmental and what can we expect in the future, and what does the transition looks like so far with everything that we're experiencing with how we take care of our workplaces and our planet and our homes in general. So Paul Thususka, thanks for joining us today.
Gus, Eric, thanks very much. As I alluded to in the preamble, we had a little discussion. Congratulations on passing that first year mark. It's awesome. It's great. It's always tough when you're starting out something new. We all know that as business people. And finding an audience that believes in you and finding a passion and being on purpose, I think it's great. And you guys have really nailed it here. So hopefully we're watching episode 33 in the next couple of years. We're going to talk about ESG. You and I had talked about this months ago, and the big component of ESG is environment. It's actually a three-part piece: environment, social, and governance. We can talk about those things in specific, what they mean to business now, especially to investor relations with retail investors to commercial investors, how that's driving business. And there's some hot news on ESG in the last week, with Tesla being kicked off the S&P 500's ESG index list. And then Elon took offense to that, considering ExxonMobil is right near the top in that ESG list and versus an electric car company. And he has some valid points. And I think, the way we're looking at it, the way I look at it, a lot of the changes in environment in the business, a lot of the investment decisions or the direction that some of the companies are taking are being driven by young millennial investors, people that are looking at this idea of like, well, it's not just a financial valuation I'm looking at. There are non-financial valuation factors now that are occurring. In 2022, the ESG assets under management are set to exceed $40 trillion in managed assets. So it's not a tiny thing that we're looking at. However, you spoke to evolution. I've seen in another podcast, continuous improvement, continuous evolution. And as we evolve in business and in industry and in innovation, you start to peel back layers. And as with everything, investment and companies and it's a sales pitch, or there's a product that's being sold. And so oftentimes you have to look a little deeper. And
Paul, can I
talk a little bit about
ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
We talk about like investors and this move towards the ESG, and maybe even more so around the E. We talk about the green economy and climate change, those types of things. Are people switching over because they're conscientious of this phenomenon called the environment and our impact on it, or is it driven by dollars and cents and seeing that hurting the planet now is going to hurt that investment later?
I think it's a combination of both. I think what happened, I don't know if you remember, probably 2004-ish, you started hearing that conversation about ethical investing. And you looked at a lot of the companies that, let's say Gus and I were talking, I'm concerned where I put my money. I don't want to put it into, there was a company, a conglomerate company named Altria, and I'm sure they still At one point, that looked like a great investment, and they owned Kraft and they owned Oreo and they owned all these different things, but they also owned Philip Morris, the cigarette company. And they were a great buy based on this US investment exchange because they were expanding their markets into Malaysia and Indonesia with 11 and 12-year-olds to sell cigarettes. So right away, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not buying that stock because that's something I'm not ethically into. But as you went away from some of these ethically charged stocks, some of the returns weren't as good. Now the demand has changed. And I think, Eric, to your point, I think people are honestly considering the impact of what's going on. There's a lot of stuff going on in the world right now. Like it's not, skipping the news, going right to the crosswords, because that's the happy place. We've got wars, we've got shootings, we've got anger, we've got polarized politics. I think if we focus too much on negative, then we don't get to look at the growth potential we have. And I think the growth potential is changing the way we do business, getting that environment consideration. Like you guys have kids, I have kids. I love fishing. I love hunting. I love the outdoors. That's the happiest place I am. That's why I'm concerned about the environment. For my kids, for what I do, in my mind, we have the greatest country in the world for natural resource, not just for extracting resource, but for enjoying resources. So
that's, you shared a good point there, Paul. I mean, you shared a good point as far as ESG and the three pillars of ESG. Because I mean, to be honest, every time I see ESG, I just automatically go to environment and then just move on, right? I don't take focus of the three pillars. And when we start talking about the different generations and what we're going to leave behind, or what we're promoting for our children and grandchildren and beyond, although there's a big component of what we're doing for environmental, that social and that governance, those two pillars are really playing a critical role right now into that process, right?
Yeah, and for that lead, so environment, yeah, if we have ESG, environment talks about the metrics on it. So there was a thing called corporate social responsibility, CSR. You might have heard reporting. They're very similar, except ESG requires metrics now. So you need measurements. It's a data-driven index to measure. So on environment, climate change, waste management, resource management, water quality, ecosystem integrity. In the social part of it, you've got community relations. So how are we with the submarine community? First Nations, gender and diversity, health and safety, human rights, labor practices, worksite conditions. In the governance piece, board structure, bribery, corruption, vendor relations. So how they relate to you and I, how our clients are relating to us, how we deal, tax strategies, executive compensation, and overall ethics and conduct. So it's no longer just, yeah, you're right. ESG, it's like, the environment. And some people don't even know what those three things are. You're going to see them more and more in the news, especially in this next 3 to 4.
Starting to hear people talk about sustainability. Like I've seen a shift away from that ESG acronym, more to like a sustainable development, sustainable production, sustainable practices. Like that's some like lingo that I'm starting to see more and more as you visit certain companies' web pages and websites.
Yeah, and it's almost like when we're looking at. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Eric.
You're seeing bids and tenders come in, and you're being evaluated on these things, but a lot of them are in reference to sustainability.
Yeah, so sustainability is a tricky word. Like it's one of the buzzwords right now, right? So I think as something gets overused, it gets valued less and less as well, because we can put so many. I guess the meaning of sustainable is to be able to do something that can be able to continue into generations and generations. So it's defining how do we create sustainability.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So and with those demands, and it's real. Like we were with a potential client in BC, International Pulp and Paper Company, and I asked them at the end of it, I said, what do you think about ESG? Is it here to stay, or is it just the flavor of the week? And vehemently they said it's here to stay. Like this is the new way. And part to what Musk was saying with his tweets of like how this is a scam, this is a sham, ESG reporting. There's some credibility to what he's saying there. So ESG is measured on public information or company released information. So Gus and I can greenwash the heck out of anything if we want. But what I think he's got enough of influence. I think Musk has enough influence that there's going to be some positive that comes out of this. There'll be more auditing. There'll be more of a deeper look. RBC, in fact, as an investment branch, if you go on their website, you'll see it. Their videos, how they speak about it. They're actually interviewing. So if Gus is a compliance officer for company X, they're not just going to take Gus's report anymore. They're going to go on site. This is an investment, a commercial investment company that is going to go on site and interview people and see it just as an MOL inspector would, just as a compliance officer for something that's government, to really verify this. Because again, that's what that young retail investor group is looking for.
Every worker deserves to go home safely at the end of the day. Book a demo with Sophie to discover how their groundbreaking EHS management software empowers workers to proactively avoid hazards and how organizations like yours can cultivate a stronger work culture. Visit them at sophie.com to learn more. Technica Mining is a premier underground mining and construction contractor. They stand for delivering quality project work on time and on budget through innovative thinking. Their excellent safety record, experienced workforce, and large equipment fleet will guarantee the timely completion of all your project needs. Trusted by the world's leading mining companies, Technica Mining has over 20 years of experience in mine construction, development, and production. Contact Technica Mining to take your next mining project to the next level. Visit them at technicamining.com. Change Itself is produced by Crownsman, the voice of industry. Check out more, including The Crownsman Show, Mining Now, The Building Energy Show, and Agriculture Now at crownsman.com.
Yeah, and that's interesting, right? Because like for us on the software side, this is exactly what's happened, right? Because technology is moving at such a fast pace, and because software can get produced at such a fast pace, I mean, yeah, we get ISO certified fairly quickly because we do need all of the systems and parameters and checks and balances and quality assurances in place to do what we do. However, it's not enough. It's not enough to prove our existence in the market or our credit, to be credible in the marketplace. So then we need our SOC 2 reports, and we need these penetration tests, and we need all these different in-field testimonials, right? We'll call them testimonials. I mean, there are an accreditation, but ultimately it's a testimonial from an auditor saying that this is exactly how they do business. We do attest that this is how they produce what they need to produce, or how they serve the public the way they said they do. It's like an integrity check, right? So you can see that happening. So I guess what you're alluding to is that you can start seeing that happening now with any industry that's putting out a product that could have the potential for long-term costs, I guess we'll call it long-term costs, without having too much energy in ESG. Like now you're saying that somebody's going to come in and audit to make sure that the ESG profile is suitable for long-term productivity and health within a community, right?
Well, if that, yeah. So the ESG, a company will set its goals and its initiatives. So again, when you set goals, you need measurement at the end. Did I achieve my goals? So you'll just as like if you're coaching a young kid in hockey, you don't set it. Sure, they want the ultimate dream of making the NHL, but you don't set unachievable goals. You set goals that your team, that your individuals can achieve and build confidence and build platforms off of. So companies will be setting ESG, environmental goals or social goals. Like Vale's got a great example, the IBC program involving First Nations commitment and joint venture partnerships, suppliers. They've actually set it out with goals, with measurable, and with points for vendors or suppliers that actually engage in that value set. So that's a prime example of taking ESG seriously, setting a social goal, and then going ahead and setting out things that address both community and First Nations and the gender and diversity. It hits 3 of the targets on that. And then it also helps so this is the other thing one of those other things is worksite conditions. Well, when I know that I have a diverse, happy, balanced workforce as an employee, I'm actually happier at work. It's a better place for me to work. So again, you just hit another social piece. Now, if we bring in discussion with First Nations, we bring in the whole environmental piece. And how can an influence come in here? So when we start bringing all these, they're very interwoven. You mentioned children, right? Like the future. One of our social pieces, we have a director of First Nations engagement and outreach. His name's Steve Miller. He was a former chief of Atikameksheng Anishinaabe for 10 years. So he works with us on, he's developed tier 1, 2, and 3 First Nations training for every single one of our employees, new, current. He's working with us on expanding job fairs and outreach with his own band and with North Shore Tribal Council and with all the bands there. And he speaks of all the time about the children. This is everything we do has to be for the children. Everything we have to do that we do has to be for future generations. It's not about me. He never speaks about himself. And it's very marked. It's a difference. It's a big difference. It's not about his acceleration. It's about tradition and about the future. And it's amazing to see that. So we've brought that right into our piece as well. And that'll go on to something else that we'll speak of in a bit. But
that's awesome, because you see companies like Gen 7, like, we see Gen 7 stations being built all over the place. And then you look at the Gen 7 mission statement, and the reason why it's called Gen 7 is because every decision you make today will positively or negatively impact 7 generations.
Yes.
And it's deep rooted in how they do work. So it is something that we're seeing a lot more. And I will say, like, as a testament to your work and to things that you've been doing with A&M. I mean, when I first started working underground, I couldn't believe the amount of things that were abandoned, so to speak, right? Where, there's unused material or there's scrap material. And at that time, it was seemingly more costly to dispose of it in a good way than it is to just, build a little spot for it and then just let it sit there. And it's been transformational to see how these areas are now being cleaned up, and you've got a much more available workplace where you don't have to deal with so much scrap, right? So it does impact your livelihood at work when you see a really clean, available workplace and supported workplace from all the other pillars as well, right? From diversity on.
And we all have our roles too, right? Like, this is like Eric has a job underground, you've got a job, I've got a job, and or our teams do, our individual teams, and certainly there are some critical jobs and critical infrastructure, but really it's like a body. No one thing can exist without the other. And when you neglect one part of it, it's like the earth too. No one thing can exist. We can't just continuously, I'm fully for developing the Ring of Fire. I'm fully for pushing in and let's make this, like, let's access our resources, but let's put the brakes on for a minute and let's do it right. Our name of our company is A&M Remediation, but remediation means to make things right or to fix something that's wrong. We like to do that right from the beginning. Let's set it up so that it's right from the start, so all the work groups are handled. So, because why spend the money at the end? Why wreck something and have to fix it when you can make it right from the beginning, right? It's kind of a weird thing. We do it all the time in all aspects of our life, right? We do it with relationships. We do it with, like, I shouldn't have bought that, or, made a mistake here. But these are some pretty big consequential things. Thanks for mentioning the underground stuff. Like, when I look at it, when I look at ESG and what, Sophie needs to do and Technica needs to do and A&M needs to do, and is we actually need to be wise to walk in line right now with ESG, or live the principles of ESG, track the data, which is huge, and see the need to innovate for ourselves and for our clients, to help our clients get to ESG. Because, what's coming down the line, like, it's only boiling over. So we had this big ESG tunnel, this big ESG pole coming up. Well, now the layers are getting peeled off. And this is where it's going to be like, well, who's really ESG? Like, who's really forcing it? And you're going to see more questions online. You're going to see more demand for real results. If some of the largest investment firms are putting their money in there, this is changing the whole relationship between commercial investors and companies. That was a B2B relationship, business to business. I think it's going to change to a B2C, which is business to consumer, and the consumer being the shareholder, the stakeholder, the community, the employee. So what we like to do, we're trying to bring, as we're a stakeholder, we're a consumer, it's a B2C relationship with us and Valet or Glencore or Rio or Tech, where we can bring in processes to properly manage their waste, to address climate change, on less transportation, on to improve water quality, which is one of the things, on no oils, toxins, anything leaching into the ground, which eventually goes to the water, and on ecosystem integrity. When we're saving frogs and fish, it sounds like small, but when we've got massive peat bogs, when we have to lower transportation, lower transportation movement, if we can minimize all these impacts, then it's a great set of principles to go on, to follow the ethics principles, the codes of conduct. If we look at our business, what's that?
It's fun to start looking at it from we're in the process of working with Cambrian in the development of our environmental program right now. Like, I've got a meeting with them this afternoon. Mm-hmm. And when we start thinking about the environment and the impacts and the things that we are doing, and when we start to apply, and like, as I'm having these conversations, like, oh, we're actually doing that, but we're not necessarily conscious of it. It's just part of who we are, what we do. But there's some really simple things that, you don't realize you're partaking, or you're helping companies with part of their ESG. Simple things like we're building battery electric bays, those types of things. Where we used to be nothing, like Gus was talking about, to have a storage that was left in disarray, until we started working with A&M was working at Taunton when I first got there, and that was to manage scrap because it had to get up. But I can't see another project going without it, right? And people are thinking about it, like, no, I can't put that there. It's got to go in this certain box. So it's a really slow, but it's gaining momentum of, like, you're not even conscious of it, but you're doing it. Like, oh, I can't put that, or let's wait for a bin, or let's make sure we got a bin. Let's limit the amount of trips we're going to make. Like, they're very small, incremental. We got to start bringing awareness to it and talking about it, like, amongst the workforce, and educating our workforce around it. That is my belief. So we can start to build up on these things. Because to your point, if we don't help our clients, we all have a part to play in ESG. We can't expect the mining industry to be socially and environmentally responsible if the people that are working within it aren't, right? Like, whether you see it or not, you've got a part to play.
And again, thank you. You're exactly right with all that. And there's the interconnectivity between all of it. I was at about a month ago. So we started at Coleman Mine managing their scrap steel. When the new legislation came for bolting at the face, you're now producing so much more scrap steel. So scrap steel in the muck circuit, that's going to block ore passes. It's going to shut down lines. You're puncturing tires. There's safety issues. Machines having, like, at some site somewhere, like a piece of metal can come through the floor of a vehicle and potentially injure somebody. So we've now, I was speaking with one of these superintendents. I just met him actually at a hockey game. And he said, I can't believe it. He said, I don't see scrap anywhere. My guys are happy. You do this, you do that. It's, we got it in bins. We got this organized. They're not shutting down the line anymore. So it saves a ton of money. He was happy. This is a guy, he's normally a pretty happy guy, but he can get pretty grumpy too. Like, you know what it's like. And we all love to complain about work, and he had no complaints. And just to see him happy like that. So all of a sudden we hit governance on how they're running their company, and they're generating profit for their shareholders. We hit on health and safety. We hit on worksite conditions. We hit on waste management, all those things. So if you're looking at areas that you think, Eric, that you're helping in this ESG front, I encourage anybody, look at the ESG. What are the principles? And you'll see a lot of companies sell ESG compliance systems or ESG guidance on how to get there. All the tips are pretty similar. Go to the United Nations Sustainable Development website. There's 17 tenets of, like, sustainable development goals. Many of these are on here, or they're related directly to that. Start looking at your company and saying, hey, well, what do we do for climate change? What do we do for resource management or waste management? What do we do for social? We met with tech out west and we talked to them about their waste plastic bottles. And immediately he said, where are you going to send the waste plastic? Because we have guys come up from the States. They're very close to the US border. We have people come up and they want our plastic, but we don't just give our plastic to anybody because we don't want it ending up in a container ship on the other side of the world on a beach somewhere. This was a senior person who, he was on site management. He was involved in the executive at tech. And I thought, geez, that is admirable. Like, that's crazy. Like they're actually going tip to tail, right? Like we bring this product in, where is it finally going to end up? And those are the kind of questions, that we all have to start asking ourselves because they're going to get asked of us in the next few years. If you think Elon Musk is going to stop pushing back against, his electric battery company or his electric car company, yeah, there are things that have to change. We have to make sure that if we're mining the lithium and the cobalt, like the cobalt mining in the Congo, there's the child slavery, the child labor issue there. They have to get around that. They're going to have to get around that. We're going to have to get around how we're going to extract lithium and nickel production in the cleanest way that suits all stakeholders, community, earth, First Nations, employees. So it's a good time now to start looking at it for sure.
And I think to your point, we're looking a lot. I think what happens too is a lot of times when I have these conversations about ESG or sustainability, people think big things, right? Big, massive initiatives, big changes in structure, big changes in ways of being. And I keep telling people it's actually not, it doesn't have to be that way. And like we look at our office space here, right? So Technica has done the same thing where you have an indoor shoe policy, right? And then people laugh at it at first. They're like, oh, really got to take off my shoes and put on another pair of slippers or whatever to walk around the building. And it seems like tongue in cheek as if it's a silly thing. But if you look at the downstream effect of just doing that, right? Yeah. Well, now, like, how you said, instead of making a mess and having to clean it, right? So same thing. Now you're not vacuuming twice a day. Or sweeping or mopping the floor twice a day. You're doing it maybe once every couple of days. Maybe like for us, it's once a week. Once a week, there's a little cleanup that happens in the office. But we know that everybody's coming in happier now because they know that their desk is always in good order. And it also promotes people making sure that their desk is really orderly because the office as a whole is clean. Like the office as a whole is clean and orderly. So if you let it slip a little bit, then it's like, it's like when you walk into somebody's car and the carpet is like perfectly clean, everything is all polished. You're going to knock your feet at the edge. You're going to, you don't want to mess it up. Right. But if it's already full of mud and everything, you're just walking in there, you're tracking in whatever you're going to track and you just keep going on. Right. So when you look at it, and it made me think about is that such small things can add up to such a major downstream effect. Right? Like even as simple as an indoor shoe policy,
It's incredible how, and that's, you can apply the 7 generations to it. Like, so there's 7 other steps behind that, like there's the things that we do. It's even how you speak to your kids when they're young. They're always going to remember that. That's going to shape them. You're baking that cookie right there. So when you think about it, the small, like you said, those small little things. So if I'm an employee at a company. So I'm going to, we have our newsletters go out monthly and, we talk about all kinds of things. Well, if one of my employees, one of my team members says, okay, well, I'm going to check this out. Are we doing what Paul says we're doing? How can we make it better? Are we following through? All these different things. If we're not, I'd like to know, our managers need to know, but even as an employee for a large corporation, if your company is saying that, you love birds, you love mammals, we're doing this for this and all these reasons, and you're at work and you see oil going down a drain because there's no proper, like, what are you doing with that? Oh, I got no place to put it. We asked for this and they didn't bring it in. All right, pour it down the drain. Whoa, wait a second. That's not what we say we're doing. And that doesn't fit with my value set, right? So you're totally right. And sometimes it's insurmountable. And people can be excused for being defeatist or feeling defeated, not necessarily defeated. Defeatist, I think, is a negative attitude, but for feeling defeated. But, talk to colleagues, talk to your partners, talk to your kids. My kids still teach me stuff on social justice and gender and environment. Actually, I got them trumped on environment. I teach them more than they teach me, but our kids know a lot because they're the next generation.
You say that, right? And I got called out. So I've got some age gaps, right? In my home. And I remember when my 16-year-old, he was younger, he was probably like 5 or 6. And I had my charger in the wall, right? For my phone. My phone wasn't connected, but it was just connected to the wall and it was plugged in and it was it. And he came to me and says, Dad, you're consuming phantom energy there, right? You need to take that out of there. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Right. So look into it. Sure enough, it is a thing. So I unplugged it. Right. And I got corrected. And then now my 4.5-year-old comes in and says, that you should take that out of the thing. So they're learning it at school too, right? Like they're learning. Yes. Yeah. It goes, here I went again. And then they're calling me out at home. So it is super interesting how we're like, like you said, you're baking in those components. And then we had the discussion almost weekly at the house too. We said, you know what, if you want a new toy coming in, you got to say goodbye to one of your toys because this is the square footage we've allowed it for all of your toys to overcome our home. And if you want another one in, you're going to have to say goodbye to one. So now they know that before they ask for another toy, that they're already thinking about which one they're going to donate to someone else or part ways with, or not ask at all because they don't want to get rid of anything they have. So it's super interesting how grassroots it can be, right?
Well, and it goes to like camping. You pack in, you pack out, right? So if you're bringing in vehicle batteries into a mining site underground, the number of vehicle batteries that go in should match exactly the number that come out. And there should be a manifest on that. Is there? Maybe not, right? The amount of, if you take oil in, like, again, I'll go back to Vale, like over the last 9-10 years, just on Vale mine sites alone, we've kept 150,000 5-gallon oil pails out of the waste. We've collected them. We've drained every single one of them. Every one of them has about 850 mils of oil left over because an operator cannot realistically get all the oil out. That's 120,000 plus liters of oil that hasn't been dumped in a yard, hasn't been run over by a dozer, hasn't been, let alone the plastic, but just the oil alone. Fish, frogs, water, all these downstream effects. If I told you I was going to pick this pail, one pail, when it started, we're going to collect this pail, and then we're going to collect that pail, you might have thought, you're crazy. So 150,000 later doesn't seem too crazy. It's a huge impact, right?
Exactly.
These little things make a difference. And
when we see the little things, like somebody brought up a couple of incidents this week that were submitted at a client site, and it came across my desk, was around batteries. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting, the perspective. We need to do a better job with batteries. I was like, yes. And if I think about where we were, 5 years ago, the fact that we have a battery recycling pail and that people are understanding and taping the ends and putting them in a container, and they're not making it into the regular landfill, like that's actually, it seems insignificant, but that's actually a huge improvement. Now, the next step is, okay, where should it be stored? So, they don't cause fires and other, leaks and those types of things, but we're slowly progressing.
Even to that point,
steps and practices.
Even to that point, just the fact that someone flagged it as an issue. So just that alone, someone flagged it as an issue, as we need to do better. Like 5-6 years ago, that would have not even been flagged. So it would have been flagged by someone for some reason through an audit. And then there would have been an awareness conversation about why we need to do something about this. But now that you're actually getting someone to just stand on and say, hey, you know what? This is actually not being handled the way it should be. That's a pretty cool transformation over the past few years.
And asking for so to your point on the ESG thing, and I don't even think it was conscious of that's where it was coming from. It was like, oh, that was a high potential, event. What are they doing to make sure that doesn't happen again there or anywhere else on those properties? I'd like to see that incident report. I was like, that's actually pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's change. Right? What's your podcast called? Change.
Got it.
Right? And that is change. And change is like the thing we most resist in our worlds, whether it be personal or like, I like a certain place to sit and I like and I try this, I don't know. And I like the way I do my work, but change inevitably comes from learning from the past, And we've already seen what degradation of the environment can do by poor business practice or by poor, just sloppy environmental practice, sloppy social practices. Like, look at the history of our country. And socially, we're talking about going up into the northern Ontario to develop. We still have 29 First Nations on boil water advisories up there. Like, let's fix that before we start slugging huge roads in and pulling the infrastructure. Like,
and we got to be the leaders in it. Like we talked about it on previous episodes. Like, change isn't always fast, but it's relative. I think that was Charles said that back in September. But it's relative. When you're in it, you don't see it. So you could take the passive, oh, well, it's just going to happen, or you can be the leader that's going to make it happen. And yeah, it's going to be hard work, and we all have to do our part. But I think what you're saying, Paul, is let's be the leaders. Let's do our part, right? On all fronts, not just the environment, but social and governance. And we will eventually get there.
Yeah. And the 3 pillars of our company since I started it: environmental leadership, improved health and safety, and improved production and profitability. And environmental leadership was always the big thing, because I always felt that we were on this like wave, but we're surfing and there's a lot of people on boards behind us still paddling. Yeah. Because some of these concepts, it's hard for some. My kids try to teach me something new. It's hard to learn. It's hard to break habits. Habits take a long time, and they get to be habits because we're comfortable with them.
Yep.
But when we start looking at, I think when one starts looking at, and this is why when you said ESG, there are things you think you're doing. I bet you're doing most of these things right now. I bet you're doing almost all of them. And I know, because I know you both as human beings, your governance is tight. Your personal and moral compasses are good and tight. It's where the profit exceeds, like there's that balance. And whether it's in a small business or a large business, it's where one can get corrupted to put aside those values, the sets, to say, okay, I can make a little bit more, or I don't have to spend as much. That's where you get that. That's the slippery slope. And that's where ESG is
short-sighted decisions that end up biting you in the ass. If I use
or hurting the environment, right?
It's short-sighted thinking that ends up that way. And it's almost back to that original topic around our conversation around the investment is you can do it for the right reasons right off the hop, right? Or it might be motivated because, people will start to see the longer term costs and impact of those, short-sighted decisions at the beginning.
Well, and those costs have to be built in too. If you think about mine closures, well, why are we not I don't know, maybe, I don't know what the structure is of the company. Maybe do they have money set aside in escrow within the profit generation? Because it always seems to be this big cut and run. It has been historically in the past. So, and I don't think the government at this point wants to take responsibility for holding companies' feet to the fire on mine closure. But, that's something that should be baked into the planning, baked into the financial costs. And I think that's part of ESG as well, is that they're starting to say, well, the true cost of doing business here, if we're not causing any harm, and then we have to look at innovation, which is going to help us get there. And so you follow this principle of operational eco-efficiency when you're related to the environment, which means making more with fewer resources, less waste, and properly handled waste. Again, operational eco-efficiency, producing more with less waste, fewer resources, and properly handled waste. And that's the goal, is to do that. So we want more, we always want to maximize, but not at the cost of, of eating everything up and spitting it out harmfully.
Yeah. So that's a good set of advice there. So as we wrap things up, because we try to keep things, within the 45-minute range for our audience, with these conversations, we always thank you for joining us today, because we always get these conversations where we can really spend the day or a couple of days and crack out a couple of meals and the beers and keep going. They're so interesting. So as far as a company that's forming today, or a company that wants to really invest in their governance and their strategies today, Would those be your main three pillars to say, focus on these things to drive your excellence strategy for ESG?
I think so. I'm no expert on it at all. I think the governance and the social piece and the environment, those are the ways I want to live my life, straight out. So if it feels good, it's probably the right way. And I think investment and industry is catching up to that. I think this is what again, I'll go back to the young millennial investors and even some older investors now, because their grandkids are coming into play. This is where to go. So yeah, fashion your business. Take a look at it. Just take a look. It's like a gap analysis.
Gus, you said something interesting there. And again, leaning into it takes time for things to change. It's also been my experience that if you don't already have one of those things in place and you're starting something new, it's easier to build a habit because you're not having to let go of a previous habit. So as we're building these new companies, these new people are coming into the workforce, they're already there with a lot of that thinking. To your point, the kids come back from school and talk to me about things like sexuality, transgender. To them, it's just normal. When I was in school, it wasn't even a thing we acknowledged. Right. And so all of these movements, it's just naturally progressing. And the rest of us, if we're not there, we need to start catching up. And it's that slowly start turning and changing. But I think for the people starting out, if it's not your platform, you're going to be left in the dust because you're going to be stuck changing it. You're going to be way behind the curve. And I'm not an expert, but that's my observations. If you get started as quickly as you can, you're going to build that naturally as part of your values and the things that you do. Right from the hop. There's not going to be having to learn, forget this whole process and way you want to do it. It's just what you're doing.
Yeah, it's the way. And we can make money doing it. There is a good way to do things and you can 100%. Be profitable. The thought that you can't be profitable caring about the environment and caring about social issues.
Well, you touched on it about mine closure. So there's somebody's left to pay at some point. If you do a little bit of it every day as you keep going, it's going to be profitable.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. Gus, I could talk about this. It was awesome. Thanks for letting me go on and sharing some of my personal views and some of the stuff I know about and how we run our company. And props to you guys again. It's great. Love the conversation piece. Thank you.
Appreciate learning with you today.
So here we go. Episode 13 in the books. We're looking forward to all your comments and feedback as usual. So please don't hesitate to leave your feedback as we post these episodes. And we'll be coming back at you. So thanks a lot. See everybody till next time.